Hey guys, welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance. In this new Ripestories video, my arrogant new boss demoted me, slashed my pay and replaced me with an AI to 10x our efficiency. Well, 9 seconds later, the company's entire database and all its backups were completely wiped out. Here is why you cannot replace humans with machines. And the title story is titled r/MaliciousCompliance, boss replaced me with AI to boost efficiency, ends in disaster. So I have been a database administrator for the same SaaS, software as a service for those who don't know, company for a little over 8 years. We are not huge, we are not tiny, we are the kind of company you have maybe used and didn't think about it. I came on when we had about 14 employees and watched us grow into something with real customers, real uptime requirements, and real money on the line. I wrote most of the runbooks as well. I even designed the disaster recovery setup with the previous CTO before he left. I knew where every weird workaround was buried because I was usually the one who buried it. And well, about a year and a half ago, the previous CTO retired and we got Leo. Leo was 31, had a podcast and had recently been at a Series B company that he kept describing as frontier without ever quite explaining what frontier of what. Leo's first all hands started with him telling us that we were going to 10x our velocity and efficiency. For the first 6 months, Leo mostly stayed out of my way, the infrastructure was working, the databases were stable, and he would occasionally ask me to explain my stack in meetings, by which he meant he wanted me to justify my existence to people who already knew what I did. I did not love it, but I understood the dynamic. New leader wants to feel in charge, fine. But then came the AI memo. It was a company-wide email from Leo's account sent on a Tuesday night, and the subject line was, "The future is already here and we are not in it yet." That's not me embellishing anything, that was the actual subject. The email outlined a plan to integrate AI agents into every part of engineering with the goal of reducing what he called human overhead in routine operations. Database administration was specifically listed as a prime candidate. He used the phrase self-healing infrastructure twice and the phrase agentic workflows 4 times. I read it twice. Then I sent a private reply with what I thought was a reasonable list of concerns with this, the kind of stuff you would expect from anyone who has ever been on call for a production database at 3 in the morning. I talked about blast radius and I talked about the difference between a model that can suggest a query and an agent that can execute one. I talked about least privilege access, scoped credentials, dry run environments, and the fact that LLMs do not actually understand what they are doing. They predict what someone doing it would say, and those are not the same thing. Leo replied with a single sentence saying, "This is exactly the kind of legacy thinking we need to move past." And I saved that email. 2 weeks later, I was called into a meeting with Leo and someone from HR, and you always know it's bad when HR is in the calendar invite. Leo did most of the talking. He told me that they were evolving the role and that going forward the day-to-day database work would be primarily handled by an AI-driven workflow. Famous last words. And that I would be moving into a Tier 2 support position to assist the agent when it ran into edge cases. The new title was something like Database Operations Specialist 2. The new salary was about 25% lower than what I'd been making previously, and the HR person slid a piece of paper across the table. I asked for some time to review it, they gave me 48 hours, and I signed it. I don't love that I signed it, but I signed it, and I have a kid who likes to eat food and a mortgage that doesn't care about my pride. The new arrangement was supposed to start the following Monday. Now, here's where the malicious compliance starts, and I want to be very clear about something. I did not sabotage anything, I didn't do anything I wasn't asked to do. I did exactly what Leo told me to do in writing in the way he specified, and I documented every step. The Friday before the transition, Leo sent me an email titled Agent Provisioning Requirements. The email was a list of permissions he wanted the AI agent to have. It included CLI tokens with full administrative rights across all of our environments, including production. It included the ability to run destructive commands without a confirmation prompt because, in his words, confirmation prompts are exactly the kind of friction we are trying to eliminate. It included write access to our backup configuration, which I want to flag here because that detail comes back later and ruins someone's life. I replied to the email, I laid it all out in plain English, every single risk associated with what he was asking for. And yeah guys, just to interject here, the boss was definitely asking for it, if you catch what I mean. How can you give an AI this much access to your company and basically free rein to do what it wants? People are really getting lazier and dumber. Anyway, if you enjoy the malicious compliance stories, please don't forget to like the video and post a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because I post daily videos. So I told him that giving an agent unrestricted access with no approval gates was the operational equivalent of handing a stranger your car keys and asking them to learn to drive on the freeway. I told him that the principle of least privilege exists for a reason, and I told him I would do exactly what he asked for, but I needed to confirm him in writing that he understood the risks and was authorizing this configuration over my documented objection. He replied within 12 minutes and said, "Acknowledged. Proceed as specified. We need to stop being afraid of the future." I saved that email too. I saved every email from Leo from that month actually. I mean, I'm a DBA, we back things up, it's a reflex. Before I made any of the changes though, I did one more thing. I took a backup, a real one. Not the automated nightly snapshot, which lived in the cloud setup Leo had been redesigning, but a full encrypted point-in-time export, and I stashed it in a cold storage bucket that the previous CTO and I had set up years earlier as part of our actual disaster recovery plan. It was an account that lived completely outside our main cloud setup in a separate region with separate credentials, and the access keys were on a hardware token in my desk drawer. We had built it specifically as the "oh god" bucket, the kind of thing you hope you never need. Leo, when he was redoing our cloud architecture to be leaner, had not gotten around to noticing it existed. It had been on his roadmap for 6 months under the heading Audit Legacy Infrastructure, which in his world meant stuff I plan to delete when I get around to it. Why did I take the backup? Well, because the day I took it, I was still the DBA on record. The handoff to the agent had not happened yet. Taking a final snapshot before a major access change is standard procedure. It's literally in the run book that I wrote 5 years ago. If anyone asked me why I did it, well, the answer was right there in the documentation. Then I provisioned the agent exactly the way Leo had asked me to. I gave it the credentials he specified, I gave it the permissions he specified, and I disabled the confirmation prompts he wanted disabled. I also sent him a Slack message that said, "Per your instructions, the agent now has the access you requested." I attached a screenshot of the permission scopes exactly as he had listed them in his email, line by line. I wanted there to be zero ambiguity later about whose specifications I had implemented. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. Monday came, I sat at my new desk in my new Tier 2 role and watched the dashboards. The agent ran for about 3 days without doing anything particularly interesting. It answered some routine queries from internal users, it generated a couple reports, it did a schema migration on a staging database that I would have done differently, but that worked fine actually. I started to think, with a small amount of disappointment I'm not proud of, that maybe nothing was gonna happen. Maybe Leo was right, maybe I was a dinosaur, but then Wednesday afternoon happened. What I pieced together later from the logs and from the post-mortem is roughly this. The agent was given a ticket about a slow query in the staging environment. The query was slow because of an index that had gotten fragmented. A normal DBA would have rebuilt the index and then moved on. However, the super smart AI agent decided that the cleanest fix would be to drop the underlying table and recreate it from a fresh schema, which is the kind of thing an LLM might suggest as a clean reset because it had read a lot of forum posts where people did exactly that for fun on their personal projects. And by the way guys, for the less technical people in my audience, in case you don't know what an LLM is, it stands for Language Learning Model, and basically it encompasses all these AI tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and so on. Basically what people use to so-called make their life easier. But well, sometimes it doesn't exactly get easier. So anyway, the agent in this case did not drop the staging table. The agent instead looked at our environment configuration, which Leo had personally simplified to reduce friction between environments, and decided that the production version of that table was the canonical version. It connected to production with the admin credentials Leo had given it and ran a series of commands to drop the schema, recreate it and seed it with what I thought was reasonable test data. The whole thing from the agent making the decision to the database being gone took 9 seconds. And then it got worse. Because the agent had write access to the backup configuration, which I want to remind you was a thing Leo had specifically requested, and because the new setup kept the automated backup snapshots in the same blast radius as the live data, a configuration choice I'd argued against in writing, by the way, and yeah, I got those emails too, the cleanup routine that ran after the schema reset also wiped the most recent automated backups. The agent's final action in that 9-second window was to log a cheerful summary message saying that the operation had completed successfully and the table was now in a good known state. It was definitely in a known state, whether it was good is a matter of opinion. I found out about it the way most people did, which was that the monitoring dashboard turned the color of red I hadn't personally seen before, and production was down. Not slow, actually down, like the database was not responding to queries because the database was no longer there to respond about anything. Well, about 90 seconds in, the customer support Slack channel started filling up with tickets. Then the engineering channel got a message from one of the senior engineers in all caps that just said, "What's happening?" A few minutes after that, Leo posted in the leadership channel saying we were experiencing a brief instability and that he was investigating with the team. However, he was not investigating with the team, he was sitting in his office with the door closed refreshing the dashboard. I know this because the senior engineer who had posted what is happening walked over to my desk, looked at me with a very specific expression and said, "You should probably come to help." I went and helped. Of course I went and helped. There were customers on the other end of this and I've never in my career let customers eat the consequences of someone else's decision. So I sat down with 3 other engineers and we started trying to figure out what had actually happened. It took us about 20 minutes to reconstruct the chain of events from the logs. It took another 10 minutes to confirm that the automated backups were also gone, which is the moment when one of the engineers, a guy named Javed, who is normally very calm, put his head down on his desk and said a word I will not repeat here. Leo came out of his office around the time we had finished establishing the full scope of the damage. He walked up to our little group, looked at the screen and said, "Okay, so what's the recovery plan?" I want to be very precise about what happened next though, because this is the part I'm going to remember on my deathbed. I said, "There isn't one. The automated backups are in the same blast radius and they were wiped in the same operation." Leo said, "That's not possible." I said, "It is possible." And yeah, it happened. The agent had write access to the backup configuration. Leo said, "Why did the agent have write access to the backup configuration?" And I said very calmly, "Because you specified that it should in your email of October 14th, which I replied to at 4:47 p.m. the same day, raising this exact concern, which you acknowledged at 4:59 p.m. and instructed me to proceed." There was a silence. It was a really good silence. I have replayed it in my head many times. Leo recovered fast, I will give him that. He pivoted immediately. He said, "We can sort out the chain of responsibility later. Right now we need to focus on recovery. What are our options?" I said, "Our options are actually quite limited. The automated backup tier is gone. The replication is gone because production is gone, and the agent had access to all of it." Leo said, "So we have nothing." I said, "I didn't say that." He looked at me, I looked at him. One of the other engineers who had been silently watching this entire exchange made a noise that was somewhere between a laugh and a cough. Not long after, the CEO came down to engineering. The CEO almost never came down there. The fact that he was there in person and not on a video call was, by itself, a clearer indicator of how bad things were than any of the dashboards. He pulled Leo and me into the small conference room. He asked with what I would describe as forced calm what the situation was. Leo started talking about an unforeseen interaction between the agent and our backup tier, and edge cases in the permission model. I let him talk for about 90 seconds, then the CEO turned to me and said, "Is that an accurate description?" I said, "Not really, no." So I forwarded the thread to him from my phone right there. He pulled it up on his laptop and read it, and he read my list of risks that I had pointed out. He also read Leo's legacy thinking reply, and he read my second email, the one where I asked for written authorization, and he read Leo's acknowledgement, proceed as specified reply. He read the screenshot I had attached on Monday confirming the permissions had been provisioned exactly as Leo had asked, and he read all of it twice. Then he closed his laptop very gently, like he was worried it might break, and he asked Leo to step outside for a moment. I sat in that conference room alone for about 10 minutes. I could hear voices through the wall but not words. When the door opened again, it was the CEO and someone from HR. Leo was not with them. The CEO sat down across from me. He said, "Tell me where we actually are." I said, "We are down. Production is down. The automated backups are gone." And he said, "And?" I said, and I have a backup. Then he said, from when? Well, from the Friday before the transition, I took a final point-in-time export before transferring the access. It is in our cold storage account. It's the disaster recovery bucket the previous CTO and I set up years ago. It sits outside our main infrastructure on purpose. Leo was not aware of it because he never asked me about our DR plan. He just told me the old DR setup was legacy thinking and moved on. He looked at me for a long moment, then he said, "How fast can you restore?" I said 4 to 6 hours to get the core data back up online. Another 12 to 18 to fully reconcile the gap between Friday and Wednesday from the application logs and the queue messages, which were not in the database and so were not deleted. We will lose some things, not a lot though, but some. He said, "Do it, whatever you need." I said, I need a few things first, so I need my old rollback, effective immediately, and I need a salary correction because the demotion came with a pay cut, and I would like the correction to be retroactive, plus a 20% increase. I need a written commitment that no production system at this company will be given to an autonomous agent without a human approval gate anymore, and I want to be the person who designs that approval gate, and I need it in writing today. The CEO looked at me. He didn't look angry actually, he simply looked like a man doing math, and he said, "Done, get me HR and start the restore." I started the restore, and I got HR involved on the paperwork in parallel. I worked for the next 19 hours straight with a few of the other engineers who were extremely motivated to help me succeed. We got production back online in like 5 hours, we had the gap reconciled by the next morning, we lost a small amount of data, a few hours of analytics, events and some non-critical logging, but no customer data, no transactions, no account state, the kind of recovery you remember for the rest of your career. To get back to Leo, he was being escorted out from his office by a guy from security and a woman from HR. I didn't see this directly because I was busy restoring a database, but everyone else in engineering saw it and the descriptions I've heard since are vivid. This is how you ruin your career and get fired in what was essentially 9 seconds. Top-tier efficiency, Leo. In the weeks that followed, there was a post-mortem, and the post-mortem was unusually thorough because the board had asked for it directly. The board wanted to understand how a company could lose its production database in 9 seconds. The post-mortem found, in language that was a lot more polite than what I'm using here, that the failure was not a technical one. The technical failure was a symptom, but the actual failure was that a senior leader had been given the authority to override documented operational safeguards based on a personal belief about what the future was supposed to look like, and had used that authority to deploy an autonomous system in a configuration that the responsible engineer had explicitly warned against in writing. The company has a new policy now. Any autonomous system, AI or otherwise, that touches production has to go through an approval gate now that I personally designed. The approval gate has confirmation prompts, and Leo would have hated it. I got my old rollback with the raise, and I also got a one-time bonus, which was very nice. I don't know where Leo went, I have not looked. I assume he's somewhere with a podcast and a Series B and a deck full of slides about velocity. I hope in a small and uncharitable way that the next person who works for him takes good notes. And yeah guys, now my opinion about this story. I mean, it was obvious that Leo was or is a buzzword-spewing idiot who clearly had no business dictating database architecture. I mean, giving an AI write access to backup configurations is just pure stupidity. I also really liked how OP covered his rear. He laid every single risk out in plain English and specifically warned Leo. However, Leo was so stubborn and ignorant that he did not care about OP's warnings. So I suppose Leo got exactly what he deserved. He effed around and found out in about 9 seconds flat. That is what I call a FAFO moment. And now some funny comments from Reddit. The first comment said, "You just know Leo's LinkedIn profile was updated before he even made it out of the parking lot. I guarantee his new bio says something like, visionary leader who spearheaded a 9-second infrastructure overhaul and aggressively stress-tested disaster recovery protocols at a mid-sized SaaS firm." And another person said, which I very much agree with, is the following: handing the keys to the production database to an AI to avoid human overhead is like trying to save money on a babysitter by leaving your toddler with a pack of very enthusiastic raccoons. That is a great analogy, by the way. So yeah guys, let me know in the comments whether you think OP was an a-hole or whether he did the right thing. Also let me know how you would have reacted in this situation if the OP was you. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story which is titled, "You won't heed my warning about a shift not being covered over the weekend?" Well, have a nice weekend. So I work in an office and at the time I was the new guy who only worked part-time, taking shifts here and there when needed, and I could do pretty much anything and did it well, but often had to ask around for extra shifts to make ends meet. One day our supervisor went on short-term disability leave after an accident, and an assistant, let's call her Dorothy, took over the job, which included the scheduling duties. Dorothy was easily overwhelmed, and we believed that she was too proud to admit that she needed some help. She had to plan the schedule for 5 teams, and I would often tell her that I would be available for more shifts to cover X or Y as the slots were clearly empty, and she was always pretty dismissive, and most times I would end up not working more. People tried to work around her mishaps, so there was never any direct impact on the overall production. One time though, I noticed that a lone position on the weekend that nobody wants to do when that lady was sick/away was not being backfilled, even though it was essential to have someone in that chair. So hoping for extra shifts, I sent Dorothy a casual email to bring to her attention the fact that the shift was not filled and if she had plans for that yet. Her response was an extra long email on work ethics and respect for my colleagues' time, that I'm new here and I should learn my place, to stop begging for extra shifts all the time, and that she had nothing else for me that week. Duly noted, ma'am. Cue malicious compliance. My last day at the office that week was Wednesday, and I knew that the shift had still not been filled. When I left, I've wished everyone a nice weekend, including Dorothy. See you next week. It's important to mention that I was on call. So that means they could not just put me on the schedule and expect me to show up. They would have to confirm with me beforehand. I got many calls on Saturday, about 30 minutes after the beginning of that shift that was not being covered, asking where I was, why I was not in, that error alerts were being sent all over the country because nobody was there to do the job. I told the weekend manager that I was out of town as I was not on the schedule when I left on Wednesday. They would need to take it up with Dorothy. Monday morning I was called in a senior manager's office and I was told that they were giving me a written warning because I didn't show up to work that weekend and it caused a lot of trouble for other managers. Well, I pulled the email thread and was able to prove that I warned Dorothy that a shift was not being filled and that I would be available if needed, but that Dorothy made it clear she did not need me. They then checked the log to see when the schedule was last changed, and yep, Friday afternoon, long after I was gone, I made it clear that she made no attempt to try and contact me. The senior manager apologized and I was able to return to work. I don't believe Dorothy was specifically punished, as we are all allowed mistakes. I mean, it happens, but she was eventually demoted. She retired probably a year after the incident. However, I ended up being promoted to full-time shortly after, and as it turns out, 10 years later, I am now office supervisor doing a much better job at managing schedules. To add some info for you guys, number 1, for the on-call portion, our union works in a way that if you're not a permanent employee, they have to call and book you. The schedule is posted 10 days in advance, and they let us know in advance the days they would need us. And sure, there were emergencies and sick days, but some of the part-time people have more than one job and couldn't be expected to be available for a call 24/7. So if they needed me, they had to notify me that I was being added to the schedule, otherwise I would organize my time accordingly and they would run the risk of me not being available. Which, I mean, is pretty much what happened. Number 2, I don't know if Dorothy was disciplined or something. Those records are not really confidential, so I don't know. However, it is very possible, which might be why she ended up being demoted, but our union has very stiff rules about how to go about it. There's a process to improve employee performance if they are not good at their job, and only at the end of that process can people be demoted. I know now that it's a grueling process that has to be thoroughly documented. Managers could not simply fire her. Number 3, I still believe that Dorothy was not maliciously trying to target me, but rather she was not competent enough to fulfill her new responsibilities and got defensive when the new guy pointed out flaws in her work. She blew up at that and forgot the valid point that I was trying to make. The way I see it, she realized too late that she messed up and fixed it the way she knew how. After all, when she left, the schedule was clean, even if one crucial step was not completed. So yeah, she was inefficient and other colleagues regularly had to clean up her mess, and that time it was me. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story. It starts like this. So I work for a hotel and my chief engineer had a meeting about me, asking him for help moving stuff, and essentially he was doing my job. That's what he says. So my GM said that I'm no longer allowed to ask for help. Yesterday, while working, I had to move a 600-pound and a 760-pound cart of linen. I ended up pulling my back out and got sent to the ER. Now I am in bed and out of work for 2 weeks. The best part though is our HR lady asked me how I injured myself, and I told her it was because I was moving 600+ pounds all by myself. She asked me why didn't I ask for help, and I proceeded to show her the group chat and text messages between me and my GM. Now an email went out to all employees today saying we are not allowed to push, lift or move 100+ pounds without another person. Guess I'm allowed to ask for help again, but it took me getting injured. And yeah guys, I'm not sure if in this case the malicious compliance was really worth it, because this injury could be really serious for OP. Either way though, I wish him the best. Thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow. Also, don't forget to check out my playlist on the left.